Okay, so I'll be presenting on the topic stronger patent regime, scientist mobility and innovation. To give a bit of one second. Yeah, to give a bit of background of this issue that we'll be discussing, a lot of firms have been increasingly shifting to internal R&D, which means that they're using their own research aids to facilitate innovation as opposed to hiring external scientists on a licensing basis. So this has a number of advantages. It can lower costs, it can help develop firm-specific knowledge, and so on. However, it exposes innovating firms to the risk of infringement due to mobility of their scientists. Non-compete covenants are there in place to prevent infringement of this sort. However, in most regions, the enforcement of such covenants are usually quite lax on the grounds of employee freedom. So innovating firms may patent their innovation to prevent themselves from infringement. But in the words of Shapiro 2003, the patentee the person who obtains the patent has a right to try to exclude, but not a right to exclude, which means that patents provide the innovators the right to extract applicable damages from the rival. And these damages are determined by the underlying damage regime and the strength of the patent system. So in this context, what we want to see is the effect of a stronger patent regime on the propensity of patenting for an innovating entrepreneur and the propensity of movement for the scientist in this framework of infringement due to scientist mobility. Further, we will also analyze the effects of stronger patent regime on innovation incentives and R&D investment. And here, innovation incentives imply the profitability of the innovation. Next, we will introduce product market competition into this framework of scientist mobility, and we want to see the effects, the implications of product market competition on mobility, patenting, and innovation. And finally, we will see the interactive effects of patent strength and competition intensity. So to introduce the model has two periods, and we have two players. One entrepreneur who hires a scientist to materialize an idea into a tangible product. The entrepreneur makes a wage offer to the scientist, which consists of the first period wage W0 and the second period wage W1. The scientist will accept this offer and join the entrepreneur's innovation project if the total payoff, the total expected earnings from two periods combined, exceeds its total reservation wage 2W bar. And here W bar is the value of the scientist's effort. In the second period, the entrepreneur commercializes this product without any aid from the scientist. So the scientist can either move to a rival firm and compete with the entrepreneur in the market, or the scientist can stay back at the entrepreneur's firm. So if the scientist stays with the entrepreneur, then the second period market is a monopoly. So the entrepreneur's monopoly revenue is denoted by rho I. If the scientist does move, then the entrepreneur suffers a loss due to appearance of the rival. And this loss is lambda rho I. Lambda denotes the proportion of loss due to appearance of the rival. If the rival does appear, then the rival earns a second period revenue of rho E. The entrepreneur, as we discussed, can protect herself against infringement by patenting the innovation, and the cost of patenting is C. And the patenting and movement decision take place at the beginning of the second period.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
In the previous page, when the scientist decide whether to accept the offer, does the scientist consider the possibility that in the second period, he might get a better offer from the rival firm?
Yeah, he does. So this expected payoff in the second, in the total expected payoff, the first period wage is equal to W0. But as we will see, the second period can have the wage that he expects to get or the earnings that he expects at the rival.
So the first period, the scientist is only thinking about the first period expected payoff, right? Is that what we're saying? So first expected payoff is higher than the reservation wage, then the scientist will accept the offer. And second period, he will reconsider whether to move.
No, so okay, so the joining decision takes place in the first period, and this takes into account the earnings in both the periods. The first period wage, which is known, which is equal to W0, and the second period expected earnings, which can either be the wage or be the revenue from moving.
Okay, got it.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, got
but
it.
the
Thanks.
final movement decision takes place in the second period.
Okay, got it.
Supposing the entrepreneur has paid the cost C and obtained a patent. Now, you talked about the infringement regime in the society. What's the is there a positive probability that this, even though he has a patent, the rival will get the technology and compete with him, or no?
Yeah, the rival already, so the rival, the scientist already knows the technology from working on it. So what we are saying is the scientist can move to and set up a rival, and then the entrepreneur can use this patent to litigate in a court of law. So either the entrepreneur can win the litigation or not establish infringement, and we take into consideration that probability.
There's a probability that he will fail in the infringement.
Right, right. So that is where we bring in the measure of strength. So we introduce the patent regime strength, and this is a composite measure. This includes the probability of success in the litigation, and it also includes the proportion of damage awards that he can earn, the entrepreneur can earn in case she does win the litigation. So sigma is the measure of strength, which is a function of R and delta. R is the litigation success probability, and delta is the damage recovery proportion. So we consider the loss profit rule of damage recovery. It means that if the entrepreneur successfully establishes infringement in the court of law, she can recover a part of the profits that she has lost due to appearance of the rival. So we discussed that her loss was lambda rho I, lambda being the proportion of loss and rho I being the monopoly profit. Therefore, the expected recovery is sigma lambda rho I, where sigma is the strength of the patent system. So we want to see what happens when the patent regime is made stronger. And this can be due to stronger litigation processes, which can make it easier to establish infringement, or can be due to higher damage awards in case the infringement is already established. So for simplicity, we will write sigma lambda rho I as gamma rho I in some places, and a change in sigma is proportionate to a change in gamma because lambda is a parameter. Okay, so we need to understand the payoffs in the second period for the scientist and the entrepreneur for different decision alternatives. So first consider that the scientist decides to stay with the entrepreneur in the second period. The entrepreneur can not patent the innovation, in which case the scientist earns the second period wage W1 at P equal to 0. And the entrepreneur's payoff is rho I, which is the monopoly profit, minus the wage that she's paying to the scientist, plus W bar, which is the value of the scientist's work. Next, the entrepreneur might patent the innovation, and the scientist's payoff in that case is W1 at P equal to 1. And the entrepreneur earns rho I minus W1 plus W bar minus the cost of patenting, which is C. Now, if the scientist moves in the second period, once again, the entrepreneur cannot patent, in which case the scientist earns rho E, which is the profit at the rival, plus W bar, which is the value of his effort. And the entrepreneur earns rho I, which is the monopoly profit, minus lambda rho I, which is the loss due to appearance of the rival. So basically, this is the duopoly profit. And if the entrepreneur does patent, the scientist will have to pay this amount towards damage recovery, and the entrepreneur minus gamma rho I, this is subtracted from the scientist payoff, and the entrepreneur earns the duopoly profit plus the damage award that she's getting minus the cost of patenting. So using these payoffs, we have the total expected profit of the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur's problem is to maximize this expected profit subject to the scientist's participation constraint. So S denotes the scientist staying at the entrepreneur's firm. M denotes the scientist moving at the rival firm. We also have N here, which denotes the scientist moving to the non-R&D sector. Here at the non-R&D sector, the scientist can earn wage equal to his reservation earning, which is W bar, However, in equilibrium, we will see that this never happens because the entrepreneur will always find it optimal to pay the necessary wage and retain the scientist. So we will not see the non-R&D sector in equilibrium. And P equal to 1 or 0 denotes patenting or not patenting by the entrepreneur. The scientist participation constraint is that his expected earnings in 2 periods, which is the first period wage W0 plus the expected second period earnings, exceeds the total reservation earnings 2W bar. So to solve this model, we will first need to determine so we'll solve it by backward induction. So the first step is to see the second period movement, patenting and wage decisions. This is in the epsilon I, epsilon E space, and rho I and rho E are random variables, which are denoted as rho I bar plus epsilon I and rho E bar plus epsilon E. So this diagram shows the boundaries between movement and patenting decisions and the corresponding wage that the scientist gets in the second period. So how we derive this is that the scientist will move when the earning at the rival is greater than the earning at the entrepreneur, which means that the scientist can move when the entrepreneur does not find it optimal to pay the wage to retain the scientist. And this will happen when the loss from movement is less than the wage that she requires to pay. So using this logic, we have derived this boundary of movement. Above line A, the scientist finds it optimal to move to the rival firm. The entrepreneur will patent the innovation when her loss is sufficiently high to cover the patenting cost. So when epsilon I is high, which also means when rho I is high, the loss which we show as lambda rho I is also high. And hence for higher values of epsilon I, the entrepreneur patents, and for lower values, she does not patent. Between line A and B, so anywhere below line A, the scientist does not move to the rival because the entrepreneur always finds it optimal to pay a sufficient wage and retain the scientist. Between A and B, the scientist would have moved to the rival firm had the entrepreneur not retained him. So the wage is determined from this next best alternative. Once again, the entrepreneur patents when the loss is high and does not patent when the loss is low. If it is patented, then the scientist earning at the rival is rho E minus the damage recovery plus W bar. So this is also the wage. And if it is not patented, the scientist's potential earning at the rival is rho E plus W bar, and hence this determines the second period wage. Now between line B and line C, the scientist will move to the rival firm when the innovation is not patented. However, if the innovation is patented, then the scientist no longer finds it optimal to move to the rival firm due to the damage awards that he has to pay. So he will move to the non-R&D sector. Accordingly, we see that when it is patented, the wage is W bar, and when it is not patented, wage is rho E plus W bar, which is the earning at the rival. So this L-shaped line denotes the boundary of patenting. And below line C, the scientist always finds it optimal to move to the non-R&D sector. However, this does not occur in equilibrium because the entrepreneur always retains the scientist, and she never patents because there is no possibility of a rival firm arising. So one thing to note here is that above line A, when the scientist is moving, patenting is taking place to reduce the loss to the entrepreneur from movement. And below line A, the scientist always stays with the entrepreneur, but patenting still takes place. And this is due to wage reduction, so that the entrepreneur can reduce the second period wage that she needs to pay to the scientist. So given these decisions, we come to the first lemma, which shows the expected profit of the entrepreneur. We would expect that patenting takes place to reduce the wage of the scientist or the loss of the entrepreneur. Both would imply a positive effect on the entrepreneur's expected profit. However, the second and third term in this lemma denote otherwise. We see that the entrepreneur's profit remains same regardless of whether she patents or does not patent. The reason is that in the second period, if she patents and if the scientist's earning is reduced from movement or from the wage that he earns, the entrepreneur will have to make up for these reduced earnings in the first period wage. And these two effects will exactly offset each other. So therefore, we do not see this positive implication of patenting. The fourth term denotes the cost that she incurs due to patenting. So now we want to see, this was the model structure that we have. What we want to do is see the effect of a stronger patent regime. So we increase sigma. As we discussed, the boundary of movement and patenting was these darker black lines. Due to increase in sigma, what we have is the new boundary, which is shown by these dotted lines. So the region where the decisions change are R1 and R2. In R1, the entrepreneur was initially not patenting, but now she patents the innovation. Again, in R2, she was not patenting, and now she goes to patent the innovation. And this follows intuitively because the patent regime is made stronger. So now the entrepreneur's expected recovery is higher. So she finds it optimal to patent the innovation more often. However, we see that there is no change in the scientist's movement behavior. In R1, the scientist was moving, and in R2, the scientist was staying, and it still remains the same way. So the reason for this is the scientist's expected earnings have not changed because whatever change comes from greater patenting or greater damage awards that the scientist has to pay or a greater reduction in wage has to be exactly adjusted in the first period wage. So the expected earning of the scientist does not change, and hence the movement decision is also not affected. That brings us to our first result. We have that a stronger patent regime increases the propensity to patent the innovation. However, it has no effect on the scientist's propensity to move. The second result is that a stronger patent regime decreases the profitability of the research project. Now, there are three effects coming into play when we consider the profitability. First is when the patent regime is made stronger, the entrepreneur expects to get greater damage rewards or reduce the scientist's wage, and this has a positive implication on profit. Second, due to this reduction in the scientist's earning in the second period, the entrepreneur has to make up for it in the first period wage, and this has a negative implication on profit. And these two effects exactly cancel each other. The third effect comes from an increase in patenting cost due to the greater propensity of the entrepreneur to patent the innovation. So the three effects, and this greater patenting cost has a negative impact on profit. So the three effects combined imply a negative impact of a stronger patent regime on the profitability of the research project. Okay, next we want to see the effect of stronger patent regime on the total R&D expenditure of the research project. So the R&D expenditure of the research project is defined as the sum of wages, W0, which is the first period wage, and this is the sum of the second period wage for different decision alternatives. And this will equal to the blue bar minus the scientist's earning from moving, and this second line comes from the scientist's participation constant. So proposition.
Sorry, can you finish? Can you go back to proposition 2 after you finish?
Sure. Yeah.
You are saying proposition 2 is a little paradoxical. You are saying strengthening the patent regime decreases the profitability of the research project.
Exactly. This result is counterintuitive. We would expect it to increase the profitability,
yes,
but
yes. So that's the surprising thing so far.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to explain why that, how that is possible intuitively without doing any math.
Right. So what happens here is that the entrepreneur wants to patent the innovation more. So the patenting and movement decisions are taking place in the second period. We saw that a stronger patent regime makes the entrepreneur patent the innovation more often, because in the second period, she can use this patent to either reduce the scientist's wage or increase her damage recovery in case the scientist moves. So the entrepreneur patents more often, and this leads to a decrease in the scientist's expected earning in the second period. So to hire the scientist in the first period, the entrepreneur will have to pay a higher first period wage. And these two effects, the positive effect in the second period and the negative effect in the first period from paying a higher wage, these two effects exactly cancel each other. So what we have left is the higher patenting cost that she incurs from the greater patenting in the second period.
Yes, I understand. So so the wage that he has to pay goes up. Huh?
Right, the first period wage goes up.
affecting his profit.
Another clarification question, please. What is the difference between the meanings of tightening in proposition 1 and strengthening in proposition 2?
It's the same thing. It's all increase in the strength parameter.
So then back to Pradeep's question, it seems proposition 2 partly contradicts proposition 1, bullet 1.
The entrepreneur does patent more often, but that patenting does not necessarily lead to greater profitability or the expected profit of the entire innovation project. But if we look at the second period isolated, we will see that the propensity to patent has gone up.
So he's paying, the profit is being parted, he's parting with the profit in terms of higher wage to the scientist.
Yeah, okay.
That's the point.
Right.
Can I also ask, I thought you meant that from scientist's point of view, the increase in the first period wage cancel out the decrease in the second period wage. So scientist is, no, it's not cancelled. So scientist is better off or worse off? Or it's the same?
So the scientist remains the same because when we have the participation constraint holds with equality and equilibrium. So the scientist's earning remains the same.
Remain the same. So that means the entrepreneur absorb the extra cost of patenting.
Yes.
Right. That's why the profit has gone down.
Exactly. Yes.
So Madhuparna, I really suggest following Rabba that change the word strengthening to tightening. One should never use two words for the same thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, so next we want to see the effect of strengthening the patent regime on R&D expenditure. And we will find that the strengthening of the patent regime increases the R&D expenditure of the research project. Now, if we consider this second equation, we will see that the entrepreneur patents more often. So this region increases, and further due to greater patenting, the recovery, the damage recovery also increases. So here we have gamma, which will go up. So this will imply a fall in these terms and R&D expenditure will go up. The intuition once again comes from the fact that when the patent regime is strengthened and the scientist is moving, his expected earnings in the second period from the rival firm also decreases because now he has to pay greater damage awards to the entrepreneur. So this will necessitate a greater first period wage and that will increase the R&D expenditure. So next we want to see the effect of intensity of competition on the different innovation attributes in this setup of scientist mobility. To introduce intensity of competition in our framework, we define product market competition intensity by theta. The entrepreneur's loss due to appearance of a rival, this is lambda was the proportion of loss, this is the function of theta, because if competition intensity in the second period market is higher, then the duopoly profits are lower. So this difference between the monopoly and duopoly profits will be higher. So the loss is a function of theta. We write the entrepreneur's duopoly profit as 1 minus lambda rho I, and we write the rival's duopoly profit rho E as kappa times 1 minus lambda rho I, which is a proportion of the entrepreneur's profit. And when the firms have symmetric optimization problem, kappa is equal to 1. Now, this is the basic structure. To explicitly model these payoffs, we use the Hotelling model of competition. So we consider a Hotelling city of length L. The entrepreneur's firm locates at point 0. The rival's firm locates at point L. We consider market expansion due to technology diffusion. This means that if in the second period the scientist does not move and we have a monopoly, then L is equal to 1. However, if the scientist does move and we have a duopoly, then L is greater or equal to 1. So the underlying consumer base expands if the scientist moves and if there is technology diffusion. And this can happen when the establishment of a new firm attracts consumers from different geography or different demography. Consumers are uniformly distributed in 0 to L. They value the firm's product at V and incur transportation cost of T. Each consumer can consume a maximum of 1 unit, and we normalize cost to 0. We assume B greater or equal to 2T to ensure market coverage. In this framework, theta, which is the competition intensity, is equal to the inverse of the transportation cost. So 1 by theta equal to 1 by T measures the competitive pressure in the market. We solved the Hotelling model and we derived the payoffs that we were seeing as random variables so far as functions of theta. So rho I was the entrepreneur's monopoly profit, that is B minus T, and replacing T with theta by 1 by theta, we get rho I as a function of intensity of competition. Similarly, we have 1 minus lambda rho I equal to rho E, which are the duopoly profits as a function of intensity of competition theta. And then using these two, we derive lambda, which is the proportion of loss, once again as a function of theta. To solve this model, we will make the following assumptions. First is this product market competition intensity is realized at the beginning of the first period. So it is common knowledge to the entrepreneur and the scientist. We will relax this assumption and we will discuss the implications subsequently. Assumption 2A states that the patenting cost should be sufficiently low such that patenting occurs for at least some levels of competition intensity. So basically the cost shouldn't be too high to completely rule out patenting. Assumption 2B is a stronger assumption which says that patenting should occur for some levels of competition intensity where movement also occurs. So this necessitates co-occurrence of movement and patenting. Once again, we will discuss the implications of relaxing assumption 2B. Okay, so now we see the different second period decisions that we discussed earlier for different levels of competition intensity. So what we see here is that for lower levels of competition intensity, below theta 4, movement occurs, patenting does not occur. Up to theta 1, we have movement occurring. The reason we can see from here is that lambda rho I is the loss to the entrepreneur due to appearance of the rival, and rho E is the scientist gain at the rival. So as long as the scientist gain is higher to the higher than the loss to the entrepreneur will not find it optimal to retain the scientist. So therefore, theta 1 is the boundary of movement. Below theta 1, movement occurs. Above theta 1, movement does not occur. And this implies a monotone relation of competition intensity with movement. So as competition intensity increases, movement first occurs and then ceases. Next, we consider the patenting decision, and this comes from the patenting cost. And first, when the scientist moves, it comes from the recovery, which is sigma lambda rho I, and C, which is the patenting cost. And when the scientist stays and the patenting happens for wage reduction, we have the comparison between C and rho E. So the boundaries of patenting are theta 4 and theta 3. So what we see is first, the entrepreneur does not patent the innovation as competition intensity increases. But as competition intensity crosses this threshold theta 4, she starts patenting the innovation. But when it crosses a higher threshold theta 3, she again ceases to patent. So we say that patenting behavior has a non-monotone relation with competition intensity. That is what proposition 4 describes, that patenting behavior has a non-monotone relation with the level of competitive pressure in the market, and movement behavior has a monotone relation with the level of competitive pressure in the market. Next, we want to see the relationship with innovation profitability and R&D expenditure. So we use the second period decisions, and from there we get the second period wage, and using it in the participation constraint, we derive the first period wage. And then using all these values, we can derive pi and R&D for the different decision alternatives. So these are the equations, and we will map these equations with the different ranges of theta that we saw in this diagram. And then we get the movement and profit and R&D for the different ranges of theta. So what we see is that, recall that theta 1 was the boundary for movement. So what we see is profit decreases up to theta 1, and then beyond theta 1, profit increases as competition intensity goes up. And R&D expenditure increases up to theta 1, and then remains constant when competition intensity goes up. So we say that both profit and R&D have non-modern relations with competition intensity. The intuition is as follows. So from 0 to theta 1, when competition intensity is increasing, the scientist moves. So the market is a duopoly market. So as competition intensity increases, the profit of the entrepreneur will be decreasing. But beyond theta 1, the market becomes a monopoly because the scientist is no longer moving. And here, an increase in competition intensity comes from a decrease in transportation cost, which means greater consumer alignment under monopoly. So profit increases as theta increases. Next, consider R&D expenditure. Once again, from 0 to theta 1, movement happens. So it's a duopoly market. So if competition intensity increases, profit is falling. So the rival's profit is also falling. And to make up for this fall in profit, W0 will have to be rising. So R&D expenditure, which includes the first period wage, increases. But when the scientist stays, the sum of the wages to the scientist always equals his reservation earnings. So here, when competition intensity increases, the total R&D expenditure remains constant at the reservation earnings. So it first increases and then remains constant. Proposition 5 summarizes these results that the total profitability has a non-modern relation with competitive pressure in the market, and R&D expenditure also has a non-modern relation with competitive pressure. So this is a graphical illustration of the trends of profit and R&D. One thing to note here is that theta 1 was the boundary for movement. So if we compare profits at levels of competition intensity right above theta 1 to some levels of competition intensity which are well below theta 1, we can see that profit when technology diffusion due to scientist mobility takes place exceeds the levels of profit when the entrepreneur is able to retain a monopoly. So we can say that for an innovation which is facilitated by internal R&D efforts, technology diffusion through scientist mobility can augment the project's profitability. Okay, now we want to see the interactive effects of patent strength and competition intensity. So on this axis, we have theta, which is competition intensity. And here we have sigma, which is our patent strength. And we plot the second period movement and patenting decisions in this plane. By our assumptions, we need patenting to happen. So we are not considering those strengths and those values of sigma where patenting never happens. So we consider this part sigma b to 1. This is by assumption 2a. And further by assumption 2b, we need patenting and movement to happen simultaneously. So this makes a relevant range of strength from sigma a to 1. So notice here that for very low levels of competition intensity, movement happens and up to theta 1 movement occurs, and beyond that it ceases. And even if we increase sigma along this line, this relationship remains same. So we say that the monotone relation of movement and competition intensity is sustained when we increase sigma. Next, if we consider patenting does not happen at very low levels of competition intensity, then the entrepreneur patents, and again, patenting ceases beyond a certain level. And this relationship is sustained even when we increase sigma to the maximum strength, which is 1. So the non-modern relation of patenting with competition intensity is also sustained. One more thing to note here is that theta 1 is the boundary for movement, and this does not change with an increase in patent strength. So we see that there is no change in the propensity of movement as we increase the patent strength, and this is true for all levels of competition intensity. However, when we increase patent strength, this boundary for patenting falls. So patenting increases at these very low levels of competition intensity, these moderately low levels. So theta 4 at sigma equal to 1 is the minimum value of this boundary. Below this point, patenting never occurs, but we can see that up to this point, this theta 4 line is falling. So as we increase patent strength, patenting increases for low levels of competition intensity. So lemma 4 summarizes that strengthening the patent system sustains the non-modern relation.
You mean tighten?
Yeah, tightening, yes. So that sustains the non-modern relation of competitive pressure with patenting, and it sustains the modern relation of competitive pressure with movement. And lemma 5 states that tightening the patent system expands the range of competition intensity over which patenting occurs, and it increases patenting at relatively lower competition. However, it has no effect on the range of competition intensity over which movement occurs. So next we want to know the effect of strengthening the patent system on the non-motor relation that we have derived of competition intensity and profitability and R&D expenditure. Now we saw that, so we derived this relation from the different theta ranges, and we saw that the patenting and movement decisions in the different theta ranges remain same. The width of some of the ranges changed, but the qualitative nature of the ranges remains same. So tightening the patent system also sustains the non-motor relation of profitability and R&D expenditure with competition intensity. Now, next we will want to see what happens when patent strength increases to profitability and R&D expenditure at different levels of competition intensity. So we define theta hat as the minimum level of competition intensity below which patenting is never profitable, even for the maximum patent strength. So maximum patent strength is sigma equal to 1, and below theta 4 hat, patenting is never profitable. So with this definition, proposition 6 states that stronger patents can decrease profitability when market competition intensity is moderately low. So it is between theta 4 hat and theta 1. The reason is because we saw that stronger patents decrease profitability through increased patenting, which is inefficient when we consider the profitability of the innovation. And this increased patenting can take place only when competition intensity is moderate. At very low levels of competition intensity, patenting is never profitable. And for higher levels of competition intensity, by your assumptions, we already have patenting. So additional patenting happens in this moderately low levels. And hence the decrease in profitability that we discussed also happens in this moderately low level. And stronger patents have no effect on innovation profitability otherwise. Similarly, stronger patents increase R&D investment when market competition is moderately low in the same range and has no effect otherwise. Once again, this is the range where movement and patenting occur simultaneously. So, and this comes from an increase in first period wage due to increase in patenting in the second period. So we need movement and patenting to occur simultaneously for the increase in R&D investment to show due to stronger patents, and this happens in only this range. So this gives the interactive effects of stronger patents and competition intensity on innovation profitability and R&D expenditure. Okay, now we will discuss the implications of relaxing our assumptions. So the first assumption was that competition intensity is known to the entrepreneur and the scientist at the beginning of the first period. Now we relax that and we assume that competition intensity is only known at the beginning of the second period. So the first case that we have discussed so far can happen if, say, there is an existing rival and the scientist leaves the entrepreneur's firm to join that existing rival. Then they might have an idea of the nature of competition. However, say the scientist sets up a firm, that in that case, there might not be any knowledge of the nature of competition at the beginning of the first period. So if we consider this, that in the second case, instead of the first case, we will see that all our results remain same, except that the effect of stronger patents on profitability and R&D expenditure at different levels of competition intensity alters. So the range that we showed of competition intensity where stronger patents are effective, that range will alter if we change assumption 1. Assumption 2b ensured co-occurrence of movement and patenting. If we relax that, so if we assume that C is greater than this value, which implies there is no co-occurrence of movement and patenting, but C is still less than this higher threshold to ensure patenting at some levels, we will have all our results to remain same, except for the effect of stronger patents on R&D expenditure at moderate competition, which is dependent on the fact of on the co-occurrence of movement and patenting. Next, we test our results with an alternate model of competition intensity. So this is a supply schedule model of competition intensity. We have the linear demand function. The supply schedule for firm I is given as this, where alpha I is the choice variable, which decides the level of the supply schedule. And beta is the slope, which denotes intensity of competition. So beta measures the intensity of competition in this model. So when we solved this model, we saw in our original model some theta thresholds, which determine the boundaries between patenting and movement. So from this model, when we derive the beta thresholds, these thresholds correspond to our main analysis. So the basic structure of patenting and movement decisions remains same. However, in this framework, we do not have market expansion due to technology diffusion. So we do not have the possibility of movement and equilibrium. Okay, so to summarize what we have done so far, we use a model of in-house
Can I ask
innovation.
you something about the last
So 2 minutes left,
question?
3
Oh,
minutes.
Yeah, sure.
If you go back to the last equation,
Mhm.
so you have QI in the first equation, also on second equation. Are they inconsistent? Meaning, if you add up the QIs from the second equation, does it satisfy equation 1?
In equilibrium, it will. This is the supply of each firm, and this gives the demand function.
So they are unequal except at equilibrium, as it should be.
Yeah, they should match an equilibrium.
Only. That's the definition of equilibrium.
Yes. Yes, I think that's the case. Yes.
So, sorry, you have 1 minute left. Do you want to wrap up? Or
Yes.
you might have wrapped up already.
Yeah, just to discuss the summary of what I've presented. So this model of in-house innovation with endogenous knowledge spillover was introduced in Bates and Linsan. So the idea of this model is that knowledge spillover is endogenous because the entrepreneur uses the second period wage to control scientist mobility. Kim and Marsh introduced into this framework patenting. And we introduce in Kim and Marsh's framework this notion of patent strength to see the effect of stronger patents. Stronger patents, we find that it increases patenting propensity, and this has been shown in a number of previous studies. Some examples are Holland, Zidonis, and Arora et al. However, a lot of studies have also discussed that although stronger patents increase patenting, their effect on innovation is not known. We consider innovation profitability, and we find that it weakens incentives to innovate, but it does augment R&D expenditure. Next, we find non-Morton relations of patenting propensity, innovation profitability, and R&D expenditure, and Morton relation of scientist mobility with product market competition. Non-Morton relation of innovation and competition intensity have also been discussed in a number of situations. Agyan et al. Discussed it in terms of patenting. Boom 2001 discussed it with the value of innovation, and Hongmanon and Jinjin discussed it with R&D expenditure. Finally, we show that the expected effects of stronger patents on innovation manifest only when competition intensity is moderate. That brings me to the end of.
I think we are ending very much in time now, but just one quick question. When you say you predict certain things and you give references, are your results the same as the people you are referencing or different from them, or what?
The final result is similar, but the method may be different. So some of these papers, especially these papers which show increase in patenting propensity, these are empirical papers, but the final result is, so the measure of patent strength may also not be exactly the same, but increase in patenting due to increase in strength, this is similar.
Yeah, because you are depending on a very special hoteling model for some of your results. And but hoteling model is not sacred. There could be other models. So the question is how robust it is to the way you model things. So maybe there is a broader model which describes certain relations and that don't care where it comes from and don't want to care, because where it comes from is too specific. So maybe some of your results depend only on certain broad relations between things, and then you can deduce the pattern from that. I don't know. Unifying.
Well, maybe a more specific way to ask Pradeep's question is whether the results you get under the hoteling model that you showed us are similar to the ones you get under the Cournot model, which we only saw briefly. Are they similar under the two models?
Okay, that needs to be checked. For
Rabah,
different model structures.
Rabah, I'm saying Cournot and hoteling are both very too specific. You want something, a meta model, where it doesn't care where it comes from.
That's the big question, Pradeep. But at least Cournot, you can ask linear demand. You can ask with different demand functions. That makes it more robust and more.
That is true.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that can be checked.
I'm only saying that many things we prove, I may be wrong. We start with a specific model, you derive something, then the rest depends only on what you derive. But what you derive could be also derived from many other models. So the specific model which you start with is a baggage, you can leave it behind, you can show it as one way to substantiate the real assumptions that you need. But there could be other ways to substantiate it. So the broader the assumptions, the better, the more robust the result,
Sure, Pradeep. But if I may answer, I think the model is sufficiently complicated that it's reasonable to start with a specific framework or two, and then maybe leave generalizations for others, because the model is quite complicated.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have, thank you very much.